Before roads ribboned the earth and chimneys taught sparks to climb the sky, the world possessed a quieter tongue. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from and what's the time there. Let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for being the part of my community. Let's get started. It spoke in winds that padded over water like cats on velvet paws, in tides that curled against sand with the patience of a heartbeat, in clouds that traded shadows across headlands without hurry or claim. Drift there now. Feel the din of engines recede, hear the pulse in your wrists settle, and let breath slide into the slow tempo of a southern ocean. Far to the south of the vast continent, cradled by restless swells and guarded by cliffs black with basalt, lies an island that once wore no human name. Night after night, it floated beneath constellations so old they had watched ice sculpt valleys and fire carve new coastlines, yet they had never seen a city's glare. In that unmeasured darkness, a hush had gathered, thick and fragrant, spun from fern-scented air and the hush of snowmelt creeks. The silence was not empty. It was full of waiting, like rich earth before the seed. It carried the distant croak of frogs, the hush of gliding owls, the small sighs of spiny echidnas burrowing for warmth, all woven into a single, patient breath. It was in this between place, between one heartbeat and the next, between the falling of a leaf and its landing, that our chapter opens, inviting the mind to step softly, eyes half closed, into a time before footprints were more than whispers on rain-soaked moss. Beneath that listening moon, the land unfolded in layers of hush. Coastal heathlands salted by sea spray, low valleys sequined with billabongs, highlands veiled in frost that glittered like spilled stars come morning. In the understory, musk bushes pressed their feathered leaves against one another, and myrtle trunks rose like cathedral columns, damp and scented with ancient rain. Everywhere, lichens traced slow runes across boulders, marking years in dusty greens and oranges. The night air carried a perfume both earthy and sweet, sassafras bark warming beneath decayed leaves, tea tree blossoms shedding their pale confetti, so rich of fragrance that each inhalation felt like stepping farther from the present. Marsupial mice rustled along the loam. Possums dreamed in hollows, their breaths small clouds in the cold. Far overhead, a wedge-tailed eagle slept, wings folded into silence, drifting through sky-wide dreams of daylight thermals. Yet, for all this hidden life, a spacious stillness ruled, as though the very soil had agreed to move only when the stars gave leave. And when the moon floated full and silver above the plateau, it seemed to pause there, listening for the first soft footfall that would one day enter its light. Where ridge lines bent the wind into song, low clouds gathered into ribbons of pearl, trailing through gullies like spirits unafraid of dawn. Rivers, too, joined the chorus, their waters bruised blue by shadow, then flashing white where they leapt over quartz ledges. They carried stories from mountain to marsh, cedar leaves, fragments of shell, the cold breath of snow. Eels waited beneath overhangs, bodies motionless yet alive with patient longing for the sea. Mayflies tried on wings they would wear only once, tasting sunlight for the first and final time. Overhead, eagles traced circles so wide a single turn could cradle 100 mornings. They rose on warmth that shimmered above sun-struck stones, and when they folded their wings and plunged, their silence was so complete the sound of water seemed to shiver in their wake. Such quiet was the island's language, a conversation of breaths, tides, feathers beating only once and never again. And in the deepest pockets of that hush, under root-tangled darkness, another voice prepared to answer, a voice striped like dusk itself. She arrived first as a scent, warm fur beneath damp bracken, a faint musk carried on currents winding between fern trunks. Then came the shadow. A body long and lean, hide the color of fallen bark, ribs moving in the deliberate rhythm of an animal that trusts its world. From muzzle to tail, she was built for subtlety, ears angled to gather the sting of moth wings, paws padded with moss-soft silence, jaws capable of cracking bone yet rarely hurried to do so. Across her hindquarters, dark stripes spilled toward the tail, 20 narrow bars, as though the night had draped its fingers across her back and left an imprint. Amber eyes glimmered even in daylight, seeing edges before shapes, motion before form, possibility before threat. She traveled alone but was never lonely. Rather, she moved like mist, belonging wholly to the hollow between vine and trunk, neither intruder nor tourist. Pausing at a fallen log, nose twitching to read the stories left by wallaby and bandicoot, she continued on, each step so deft the leaves never protested. With dusk, the air cooled, wrapping the forest in veils of indigo, and she grew more real for the dimming. Day's hush tapered to evening tones. Frogs began tentative notes of their liquid chorus. Beetles tuned wings. Distant surf grumbled against the cliffs. In that orchestration she moved as the conductor of her own small piece, slipping beneath tree fern fronds, circling pools whose surfaces mirrored new stars, crossing streams where polished stones turned her stripes into ribbons of light. A wallaby trail offered a scent so fresh it hummed. She inhaled, stilled, waiting for the breeze to set its compass. When it shifted in her favor, she advanced, each footfall melting into leaf litter, tension suspended between hope and patience. A twig snapped, the wallaby shivered and vanished. She did not rush. The island's timing was slow and sure, and hunger could wait another turn of the moon. Tonight was enough. The taste of dew, the smell of moss, the knowledge that her stripes were blending back into bark. Night deepened until every hollow brimmed with darkness, soft as velvet. Overhead, the Southern Cross emerged, puncturing the sky with quiet fire, while meteors slipped like whispered secrets through chilled air. Somewhere beyond the ridgelines, a quoll cried, answered by a scribble of microbats tracing invisible runes above the canopy. The tiger, settled now on a flat rock, still warm from day, lifted her head toward the stars as though scenting them. The moon had not risen, yet her eyes captured starlight and returned it, a low glow that marked her as guardian no human had yet imagined. Around her drifted night moths with parchment wings. Some settled briefly upon her back, daring a heartbeat of rest before continuing their fragile pilgrimage. In this communion, she drifted near sleep, pulse slowing until it matched the creek's rhythm. Muscles remembered the chase, but tonight they relaxed, trusting route and distance, and the long dark to hold them safe. Seasons wheeled overhead in the grandeur of planets. Spring exhaled swarms of scent. Summer wrapped the island in heat like honey. Autumn painted slopes in fires of ochre and rust. Winter crowned peaks with snow so new it squeaked beneath the wallaby pads. Through every turning the tiger roamed. A quiet verse repeated against the shifting melody. Storms stampeded across Bass Strait, shaking forests with thunder, and she found refuge in caves perfumed with ancient minerals. When the clouds spent their fury and rivers sang brighter, she emerged to trace new scents braided into rain-washed soil. In high summer, when cicadas set the air vibrating like spun glass, she slept away the noon, stirring only when dusk poured coolness into every root and hollow. Her life was no straight path but a circle of nights, each echoing the last in rhythm, yet tinged with newness. A shifted breeze, an unfamiliar bird song, a berry ripened too soon. These differences she accepted the way the sea welcomes new rivers, folding them into its constant pulse. Though she held no spoken language, the island spoke through her as surely as through wind and water. Stripes matched tea tree shadows. Gate mirrored gullies etched by centuries of runoff. Hunger waxed and waned with the moon, a cadence the wallabies seemed to understand. Predator and prey shared a dance choreographed by earth and tide, rehearsed by generations of muscle and breath. In that dance, she felt neither beginning nor ending, only the ongoing now. Then, during a spring the island would later remember for its gentleness. When myrtle buds unfurled faster than rain clouds could gather, she sensed a different call. The pull of safety, of stillness, of a place where almost born hearts might drum against hers. Days she searched, testing hollows with cautious sniffs, pressing against rotted logs to judge their strength, until she chose a den at the base of a fallen king billy pine, its arch of roots enclosing a small dark chamber. Inside, she turned 3 slow circles, lay down, rose again, gathered grass to weave a bed, then settled. Outside, spring breathed softly, stirring fern fronds like hands smoothing sheets. Sunlight pooled like warm milk around the entrance. Inside, darkness folded itself over her stripes, and the hush of the island leaned close, as though eager to hear the next verse of its own song. Within that hush, time drew a long, deep breath. Leaves warmed by day fluttered once before twilight cooled them. Water ticked over pebbles like a clock, content to run without witness. Curled against the sheltering curve of her belly, tiny lives drifted in dreams, unaware of the vast green cathedral awaiting them. Outside, the first evening star appeared. A small lantern kindled in the paling sky, and the forest replied with gentle notes. Frog, moth, a distant currawong. The island, having watched her choose her cradle, settled back to listen. And as the den darkened, heartbeat met heartbeat in a lullaby too quiet for any ear but hers, and the story leaned forward into that silence, poised to follow the first pulse of life that would soon open its eyes to fern-filtered dawn. The den lay in a place where daylight never quite arrived whole, where the forest above draped its own roof of fronds and leaves, letting the sun filter through in pale shards. It was quiet there, but not silent. The quiet was living, full of the slow breathing of roots and the faint rustle of beetles under bark. Inside the hollow beneath the fallen kingbilly pine, warmth gathered like a held breath. The mother lay curled, her stripes merging with the dappled shadows, and pressed against her belly, sheltered in her pouch, were lives no bigger than a thumb joint. They were not yet ready to know the wide forest, nor the cold streams, nor the sharp scent of wallaby on the wind. For now, their whole world was the darkness and the constant, steady thump of her heart. The pouch was a soft, swaying cradle, its walls warm with the heat of her blood. Each joey clung to her, tiny mouths latched to nourishment they could not name, their limbs still awkward, unfinished. There was no need for sight. They felt her movements in the way the earth feels the wind, indirectly, yet completely. When she shifted in sleep, they pressed closer. When she rose to stretch her legs in the still hour before dawn, their small bodies swayed gently, rocked by the rhythm of her walk. They did not yet know her shape, her scent, or the sound of her breathing, yet they knew her utterly, for she was the entire boundary of their world. Outside, the forest moved in long, slow breaths. Mist lifted from the damp ground, curling between tree trunks like ribbons of ghost water. Above the den, fern fronds trembled as a passing patamelon nosed through the undergrowth, its ears flicking at every sound. The mother emerged only when the air was thick with the scent of night, and the first faint cries of frogs announced the dark's return. She stretched in the dim light, the stripes across her haunches fading into the bracken shadows. The joeys remained in the pouch, blind and trusting, their awareness still turned inward. She slipped away into the trees, moving like water down a slow stream, every step deliberate, the earth remembering each one. The first weeks passed in this rhythm, the mother hunting under the cloak of night, returning with the first pale spill of dawn, and curling around the small warmth at her belly. Rain came and went in long silver veils, drumming softly on the canopy, feeding the moss that crept over stones. Sometimes a gust would carry the scent of the sea, sharp and wild, even here in the deep forest. The joeys grew without knowing these things, but the forest was already inside them, shaping them in silence. The cool damp of the air, the slow turning of the seasons, the pulse of life beyond their sheltered dark. One by one, their senses began to stir. First came touch, the feel of each other's warmth, the faint tremor of their mother's muscles as she hunted. Then scent, drifting faintly through the pouch. Crushed leaves, damp soil, the musk of other animals passing near. Finally, light, dim at first, as if the world beyond was made of smoke. On the morning, when Joey opened her eyes fully, the den's roof above her mother's fur looked like a shifting green-brown sky. Her sisters still slept, paws twitching in dreams, but she watched, blinking slowly, until her eyelids grew heavy again. When the day came for their first true glimpse beyond the pouch, it was not a grand unveiling. It happened in a quiet moment, when the mother paused at the den's mouth to listen to the wind. One joey's head, now furred with the softest down, emerged into the cool air. The light was different here, brighter, carrying colors she could not name. A shaft of sun slid between leaves and landed on her nose, warm and startling. She flinched, then sniffed. The scent was endless, dry bark, the faint sweetness of fallen flowers, something musky and alive moving far off. Her heart raced at the sheer vastness of it. The world was not silent either. It sang in layers, the slow creak of branches, the steady plink of water dripping from high leaves to low, the distant rush of a stream swollen with last night's rain. Somewhere nearby, a bird called, its note sharp and high, answered by another call farther away. Every sound had space around it, so that it lingered before fading. She listened as if each sound might tell her where she belonged. But before the story could be finished, her mother shifted, and the pouch's warmth closed around her again. The outside world tucked away for another night. The days that followed unfolded like the slow unfurling of a fern frond. More often now, the joeys peeked out into the dim light, watching the shifting shadows, their small ears swiveling toward each rustle. They learned the difference between the hush of a lizard moving under leaves and the quick dart of a small bird's wings. They saw their mother's patience, how she froze when the wind changed, how she waited for the silence that told her prey was near. When she returned from a hunt, her fur sometimes carried tiny burrs or the scent of crushed herbs from where she had passed. The forest began to etch itself into them, its textures, its tastes, its steady patience. Then came the first time their mother left them in the den while she hunted. The hollow seemed larger without her curled body, the air cooler. They pressed together, listening to the night sounds, a dripping branch, the scratch of something small outside, the sudden thump of a wallaby bounding past. Fear came not as a sharp stab, but as a slow rising of the air in their chests, a waiting for the return of her scent. When it finally drifted into the den again, it brought a wave of calm so deep that they fell asleep before she even curled around them. Seasons shifted almost without them noticing. The air grew warmer, then wetter, then cooler again. Outside the den, Flowers came and went in bright, fleeting bursts, and the forest's chorus changed with each turning. The joeys grew stronger, their limbs more certain, their fur taking on the faint shadows of stripes. They ventured farther from the pouch, clumsy but curious, their noses to the ground as they traced the paths their mother walked. She watched them always, not with hovering closeness, but with the steady awareness of one who knows the forest can teach as well as shelter. One morning, a light mist clung to the ground, curling around their ankles as they followed her into a patch of sunlit grass. Dew glittered on every blade, and the air smelled new, as though the world had been washed clean overnight. A bird skimmed low overhead, its shadow racing across the ground. One joey froze, staring upward, the movement sending a shiver down her back. Her mother did not scold or call, she simply kept moving, letting the joey decide when to follow. Slowly, the young one's paws began to move again, her gaze still tilted toward the sky, where a single white cloud drifted like a slow breath. In the weeks that followed, the forest became their classroom. They learned the difference between the stillness of a stone and the stillness of a predator, the way the wind could carry messages if one knew how to read it. They felt the ground shift under them as they leapt from log to log, discovering balance in the soft give of moss and the hard certainty of root. And they learned that their mother's silence was not emptiness, but listening, a way of belonging so deeply to the world that one could hear it speak. But even as the joeys grew, there remained a tether between them and the den in the shadows. It was the place where the world slowed, where the heartbeat of the forest matched the rhythm of their own. It waited for them each night, cradled in the roots of the fallen pine, smelling faintly of earth and the warmth of their earliest days. And though the world beyond its mouth was opening wider, the den still held the memory of the first breaths they had taken, wrapped in the safety of the fern shadows. And now, as a new season began to whisper at the edges of the leaves, and the air tasted faintly of coming rain, the joeys would soon step farther into the forest, not yet alone, but ready to follow the slow, sure path their mother had always walked. The morning began with a thin silver light, the kind that seems to soak into the ground rather than spill across it. Mist clung low over the forest floor, pooling between the roots of the myrtles and trailing in faint tendrils through the bracken. The joeys, no longer fragile bundles in their mother's pouch, stirred at the change in air. They could feel it in the slight crispness, in the distant trill of a bird they had not yet heard before. The den was quiet, except for the faint drip of last night's rain from the fern fronds above. And then, almost without sound, their mother rose, her body unfolding in the shadows like the slow stretching of night itself. The younger of the two sisters was first to lift her head, her amber eyes catching the pale light filtering in. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. The mother paused at the den's entrance, nostrils flaring, reading the wind. The joeys had seen her do this countless times, but today the act carried a weight, an invitation, unspoken yet clear. When she moved forward, they followed. The air outside was damp and heavy with scent, the sharpness of wet bark, the faint sweetness of flowering tea tree, and somewhere in the distance the rich, warm trace of something alive and moving. They stepped into it carefully, paws sinking into the leaf litter. Every sound seemed magnified, the creak of a branch, the crunch of a fallen twig under their own steps, the far-off rumble of a stream. For a moment, they were distracted by the world's sheer vastness. Their mother did not hurry. She moved with the slow assurance of one who knew that the forest gave up its secrets only to those who asked quietly. From time to time she stopped, lowering her head to sniff the ground or lifting it to taste the air. The older joey tried to imitate her, pressing her nose to the soil, but all she could smell was the damp green of moss and the faint tang of her own fur. She glanced up at her mother, who had already moved on, a shadow slipping between tree trunks. The first hint of their lesson came when their mother's body stiffened, her tail lowering, her head angling toward the left. The Joeys froze, sensing the change. Ahead, the mist seemed thicker, curling over a patch of open grass. The scent in the air shifted, warmer now, edged with the musk of something breathing. The younger sister's ears twitched. She could hear it too, a faint rustle in the undergrowth, irregular, alive. Their mother lowered herself into the bracken, each movement slow, deliberate. The Joeys mimicked her clumsily, their haunches too high, their paws too loud. A single snap of a twig beneath the younger's foot sent a sudden flicker of movement through the grass ahead. A small wallaby head lifted, ears swiveling. For a heartbeat, everything stilled, the Joeys holding their breath, the forest holding its song. Then the wallaby bolted. It was not the graceful, fluid flight they had imagined. It was a desperate, pounding rush, grass bending and snapping under its leaps. Their mother sprang forward, her body a streak of stripes and muscle, paws finding purchase on wet earth. The Joeys ran too, not with skill, but with sheer excitement, crashing through bracken in a tangle of limbs. They could not keep up. Within moments, their mother's shape melted into the mist, leaving them in the echo of the chase. They stopped, panting, ears ringing with the rush of their own blood. The world felt huge and empty without her in sight. But before unease could take root, the undergrowth parted, and she reappeared, not carrying prey, but walking with the same unhurried grace she had before. She came to stand before them, her breath even, her eyes soft. No rebuke, no disappointment, just the calm certainty that there would be other chases, other mornings, other lessons. She brushed past them, leading them deeper into the forest, where the mist thinned and light pooled in golden puddles across the moss. As the day grew, they learned smaller lessons, how to step over dry twigs instead of snapping them, how to move when the wind was at their backs and when to wait for it to shift. They learned that patience was not the absence of action, but the readiness for it. And they learned that failure was not final. The forest offered endless beginnings. Later, when the light began to tilt toward afternoon, their mother found a hollow log, its inside dry and lined with the scent of past rains. They settled there, the Joeys curling against her warmth, listening to the muffled sounds of the forest outside, the slow creak of trees, the distant chatter of birds settling in for the night. Their eyes grew heavy, and in their half-dreams the chase played again and again, each time a little closer, a little smoother, a little more like the shadow-quick grace of their mother. The day's lesson had not been to catch, but to begin, and in the slow rhythm of their breathing, the forest seemed to hum its approval, knowing that the first light of many hunts had just begun to dawn in them. The forest hummed in a language without words, a gentle song woven from the breath of trees, the pulse of rivers, and the whisper of leaves. It was a song older than any voice, sung beneath the sky that shifted from dawn's first blush to twilight's fading gold. The Tasmanian tiger knew it well, its rhythm shaping her steps, guiding her through the tangled heart of the island she called home. She moved as though part of this melody itself, each footfall a note in a quiet symphony that danced through the undergrowth. This island was a living tapestry, an ever-changing mosaic of life stitched together by light and shadow. Mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks often shrouded in mist that spilled down like delicate lace curtains, veiling forests of towering eucalypts and cool, shaded ferns. Waterfalls sang down rocky faces into crystal pools, their voices mingling with the steady murmur of creeks threading through mossy hollows. The scent of damp earth, sweet flowers, and the faint tang of salt from distant seas hung in the air, wrapping the world in a softness that invited reverence and quiet wonder. Within this lush cathedral, the tiger's world unfolded, a place of endless discovery and constant motion beneath the dappled canopy. She paused at a creek's edge, the surface breaking gently as she drank, her reflection rippling into stripes of dusk and dawn. Around her, the forest was alive with subtle signs, the delicate footprint of a bandicoot pressed into the mud, the flicker of a robin's bright eye catching the last sunbeams, the scent of gum leaves crushed by a passing possum. Every moment was an invitation to listen deeper, to feel the pulse of the island's breath in the brush against her fur, the whisper of wind threading through needles and leaves. The island's song was not loud or hurried. It was a slow unfolding, a melody that lingered in silence as much as in sound. Dawn spilled soft pink across the hills, waking the cicadas from their slow murmur and filling the air with their chorus. The tiger traced the paths worn smooth by generations of creatures, moving through glades bright with wildflowers and shadowed by ancient trunks heavy with moss. She knew each hollow and ridge, every fallen log and fern frond. This knowledge was not learned with words, but felt in the bones and breath, the deep, unspoken memory of belonging. Her senses drank the world, the cool wetness of a rain-soaked morning, the sharp taste of eucalyptus resin on the breeze, the distant call of a currawong threading through the trees. She walked slowly, pausing often to listen. The forest spoke in countless voices, and she had learned their meanings like a whispered secret. Sometimes she would crouch low, nose to the earth, tracing the faint scent trail left by a passing wallaby or the delicate dusting of feathers from a bird that had slipped through the canopy. The island's song was made of these small things, each a thread in the greater harmony of life. Yet, within this serene melody, there was also the rhythm of survival, a careful balance maintained by patience and quiet strength. The tiger moved with the grace of one who understood the art of waiting, of blending into shadow and light. Her stripes were a part of the forest's own pattern, a cloak that wrapped her in invisibility. She hunted not with haste, but with a stillness that spoke of respect for the dance she was part of. Each step was measured, each breath held, every muscle coiled in readiness. Life on the island was not solitary, though the tiger often walked alone. The forest was a mosaic of lives, each weaving its own verse into the ongoing song. Wallabies grazed quietly in moonlit clearings, their ears twitching at the faintest sound. Birds flitted through branches, their songs a delicate counterpoint to the rustle of leaves. Even the insects played their part, tiny drummers beating rhythms on bark and leaf. The tiger moved through this chorus with care, both predator and listener, aware of the fragile thread that connected her to all she hunted and all she shared the land with. Sometimes, at dusk, she would pause at the edge of a clearing where the fading light spilled like molten gold. The air would thrum with the gentle calls of possums awakening, the rustling of small feet in dry leaves, the distant splash of a platypus slipping into a quiet creek. In those moments, the island's song rose like a prayer, a lullaby woven from earth and sky, from water and wind. The tiger's breath slowed to match its rhythm, her eyes reflecting the soft shimmer of stars appearing overhead. The seasons passed as they always had, marked not by clocks, but by subtle shifts in the island's song. Spring unfurled with a rush of blooms and a fresh chorus of birdsong. Summer thickened the air with warmth and the persistent hum of cicadas. Autumn softened the light and scattered leaves like golden whispers across the ground. Winter chilled the nights and draped the forest in mist and silence. Through it all, the tiger moved with the steady grace of one in tune with this eternal cycle, her life a verse in the endless melody of the island. In time, the forest became more than home. It was a sanctuary and a school, a place of lessons learned in quiet moments beneath the sky. She came to understand the subtle changes, the way the wind shifted before rain, how the scent of certain flowers signaled the coming of fruit, how the calls of birds told of distant storms or the approach of dusk. These were the verses of the island song that guided her steps, shaped her days, and cradled her nights. And so, in the heart of this living song, the tiger moved, a shadow slipping between fern and shadow, a note in the forest's slow, unfolding symphony. She was part of a story told not in words, but in the soft brush of paw against leaf, in the scent of earth after rain, in the delicate dance of light through the canopy. It was a story of belonging, of endurance, of quiet strength, a song as old as the island itself, sung in stripes and silence beneath the endless sky. And yet, even as the song played on, the notes began to shift, so gently, so softly, that only the keenest ears could hear. The island's melody was changing. Night fell over the island, like a gentle curtain, softening the edges of the forest and deepening the shadows between the trees. The air cooled, carrying the faint earthy scent of damp leaves and hidden flowers that only bloomed under the cloak of darkness. The moon hung low and silver, casting pale light through the canopy, dappling the forest floor in shifting pools of quiet. In this sacred half-world between dusk and dawn, the Tasmanian tiger moved with a silent certainty, her footsteps as soft as the whispering wind. The night was her realm, an endless sea of dark and light, where her stripes dissolved into the rhythm of shadows and stars. She was neither hurried nor reckless, but moved with the steady grace of one who had learned the forest's deepest secrets. Each pause was a breath, each glance a note in the slow music of night. The world had settled into a hushed song, and she became its quiet pulse, watchful, patient, a thread in the weaving of time. Her eyes, bright and amber, caught every flicker of movement, every shift in the wind that carried the faintest trace of prey or promise. She had no need to hurry. The night would unfold as it always did, slowly, patiently, with the calm certainty of a tide. In the cool dark, the forest seemed to breathe with her, its pulse matched to her own. Leaves rustled gently as a possum padded across mossy logs, and somewhere distant, an owl's call curved through the trees like a question. The air was rich with scent, the sweet tang of night-blooming flowers, the musky promise of a wallaby's passing, the sharp, faint hint of a quoll prowling unseen. The tiger's nose twitched, capturing each fragment of information like a thread in a vast tapestry. She paused by a creek where the water whispered softly over smooth stones and drank deeply, the cold liquid filling her, grounding her in the moment. Night was the time of strength, of quiet power woven into the stillness. The tiger moved not as a hunter chasing shadows, but as a guardian of the forest's fragile balance. Her body was lithe and strong, muscles coiled beneath striped fur that seemed to drink in the moonlight. She was built for these hours, when the world softened and the usual dangers slipped away, leaving only the gentle hum of life that pulsed beneath the dark. Her paws found the earth without sound, her breath a soft rhythm that matched the sighing trees. Though often alone, she was not lonely. The night held companions in its deep folds, the rustle of a wallaby brushing through grass, the scurry of insects weaving between leaf and bark, the far-off splash of a platypus slipping into shadowed waters. She moved with respect for these lives, a silent promise carried in her steps not to disturb the fragile harmony. In the spaces between her hunts and her rest, she listened to the forest's stories, told in rustling leaves and murmuring streams, in the flicker of fireflies and the shimmer of stars. Her strength was not loud or brash, but calm and steady, like the steady drip of rain on leaves, or the slow turning of the earth beneath her paws. It was a strength born of patience, of knowing when to wait and when to move, of blending seamlessly into the rhythm of the night. She hunted not for sport, but for necessity, taking only what was needed and leaving the rest to the ongoing song of life. Each hunt was a quiet dance, steps measured and sure, breath held in delicate balance with the world around her. The forest itself seemed to lean in close as she moved, shadows parting like curtains to reveal pathways only she could walk. The air thrummed softly with the pulse of unseen wings, and whispered conversations carried on the breeze. Her ears caught the faintest rustle. Her eyes caught the barest flicker of movement, and with a patient heart, she followed the threads laid out before her. The chase was never hurried. It was a moment of connection, a communion between predator and prey, woven in the fabric of night. Sometimes she rested beneath the broad leaves of a tree fern, her body curling into the earth's embrace as the stars wheeled overhead in silent procession. The quiet strength of night wrapped around her like a shawl, offering both protection and peace. Here, beneath the endless sky, she was both small and infinite, a single heartbeat in the ancient song of the island. As hours passed and the moon traced its slow arc, the tiger remained alert yet at peace, a living thread in the fabric of the forest's night. And though the world was quiet, it was never still. Life pulsed in every shadow and whispered on every breeze, promising new stories to be told when the dawn would come again. The night held its secrets close, but in its silence, the tiger carried the strength of all that had come before, and all that was yet to be. In the stillness, she was home, rooted deep in the earth, woven through the leaves, a quiet guardian of the island's dream. And as the first hint of dawn began to bleed pale and soft over the horizon, the tiger stirred, ready to slip once more into the gentle dance of light and shadow that was her world. In the silver hush of dawn, when the forest wore its softest shadows and the air was heavy with the scent of dew and earth, the Tasmanian tiger moved quietly through the undergrowth. Her footsteps, light as falling leaves, left only the faintest impressions on the mossy floor, soon to be hidden by the wandering mist. Though her life was often one of solitude, the island held others like her. Silent, striped spirits who shared the rhythm of the land. They were not a pack, nor a crowd, but a scattered kinship woven through space and time, each thread faint yet unbreakable. Meeting one of her kind was a rare and gentle encounter, marked not by noise or clamor, but by subtle signals carried on the breeze and the quiet exchange of glances beneath the canopy. On one such morning, as the first light sifted through eucalyptus leaves and dappled the ground with gold, she paused at the edge of a clearing. There, a figure emerged like a shadow stepping from another dream. Another tiger, lean and silent, its stripes blending with the flickering light. They regarded one another with the cautious grace of old souls recognizing a familiar song. Their meeting was brief yet profound. They circled slowly, noses lifted to catch scents carried on the soft wind, hints of fresh prey, traces of distant waters, the delicate musk of the earth after rain. There was no rush, no demand for closeness, only a shared understanding that in this wide, wild world, they were never truly alone. Their eyes met, amber to amber, speaking in a language older than words, where respect and recognition blossomed in the spaces between heartbeats. The forest around them hummed with life, birds weaving calls that echoed like delicate threads through the trees, insects murmuring in the warm undergrowth, the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by a wandering breeze. The other tiger moved with the same measured grace, a shadow slipping through shafts of sunlight, and together they became two notes in the island's endless song. Sometimes paths crossed at watering holes where the air was thick with the scent of fern and stone. There, beneath the wide sweep of the sky reflected in still pools, the tigers drank side by side, each drinking deeply yet separately, sharing a moment of quiet communion. The world was vast and often lonely, but in these fleeting meetings the fragile threads of kinship wove a tapestry of connection. They were solitary wanderers, yet bound by the same ancient rhythm, the slow, steady pulse of life on this island cradled by sea and sky. Beyond these brief encounters, the island whispered of others, ghosts in the mist, echoes in the trees, memories folded into the bark of ancient gums. The tiger carried their presence with her, a soft weight resting in her bones, a reminder that she was part of a lineage that had danced through moonlight and shadow for countless seasons. She moved with the knowledge that her footsteps were followed by others unseen, her breath mirrored in the sighs of the forest. The seasons wove their passage around these silent meetings. Spring's gentle rains coaxed fresh green from the earth. Summer's warmth ripened berries and filled the air with cicada song. Autumn's golden light softened the forest edges, and winter's quiet folded the island in mist and shadow. Through it all, the tigers maintained their solitary journeys, each path distinct yet overlapping in the vast, untamed chorus of the wild. In the deeper hours of night, when stars scattered like silver dust and the world hushed to a lullaby, the presence of others was felt in the soft sounds carried on the wind. A distant call, a rustle in the leaves, the faint echo of a paw step. The tiger listened, heart steady, knowing that though they might never walk side by side, they shared the same silent covenant, to live gently, to move softly, to honor the island that had given them life. In these moments, the tiger's solitude was not loneliness, but a sacred space, an opening for reflection, for memory, for the quiet strength that comes from knowing one is part of something larger than oneself. The island was vast, and her kind few, but the bonds between them were woven in silence and shadow, unspoken yet enduring. And so, beneath the canopy of stars and the gentle breath of the night, she moved forward, alone yet connected, a single note in the infinite melody of the forest, carrying with her the whispered presence of others, forever near though unseen. As dawn began to tip the horizon with soft light once more, the tiger stepped lightly into the new day, her heart steady with the knowledge that she was never truly alone in the quiet, wild song of the island. The forest had always sung its slow, certain song, the rising and falling notes of life turning through familiar seasons, each a verse in the endless melody of the island. But then, as if the earth itself had inhaled sharply and held its breath, the rhythm began to falter. The wind carried a subtle difference, an echo out of place that whispered through the ferns and feathered the branches with uneasy shadows. The seasons, once steady as the heartbeat of the land, turned strange, unsettling the quiet balance the Tasmanian tiger had always known. Spring came, but its breath was warmer than before, curling through the undergrowth in waves that seemed to rush and fade too quickly. Flowers that once waited patiently now burst open early, their petals too tender, too fleeting in the hurried light. The air smelled less of earth and rain and more of dry leaves, brittle and brittle. The tiger felt it in the weight of the mist, the restless stirrings of creatures beneath the leaf litter. She moved through a forest that seemed familiar yet different, as if the very bones of the trees remembered a different song, one slipping through her fingers like a fading dream. Summer arrived heavy and long, its heat pressing down like a silent drumbeat. The cicadas sang louder, their chorus stretching into the nights which grew short and restless. Streams that once gurgled with clear cold water slowed to whispering trickles, and the air tasted sharp with the dryness. The tiger's paws found dust where moss once clung, and the forest's green pulse dimmed beneath the sun's relentless gaze. She wandered further now, chasing scents that were harder to read, tracking prey that had grown wary or scarce. The balance she had known was tilting, and she felt the subtle pull of change beneath the rhythm of her steps. Autumn's light, once soft and golden, arrived flickering and uncertain. Leaves browned too soon, falling like brittle whispers to the forest floor. The air carried an unfamiliar scent, faint smoke, distant and delicate, like a ghost weaving through the trees. The tiger paused often, nose lifted to the breeze, ears twitching for sounds that no longer fit the song she knew. Creatures moved differently, their calls stilted or silent, shadows where once there had been life. The forest was shifting, and with it the fragile web that held her world. Winter came cloaked in mist and quiet, but its chill seemed less forgiving. The rains fell irregular, sometimes in soft washes, sometimes in sudden floods that bruised the earth. The tiger found fewer signs of the wallabies and smaller prey she depended on. Their trails grew sparse, their presence thin. Nights stretched longer, and the wind carried a biting edge that whispered of distant things, distant footsteps, distant fires. She moved with caution now, sensing not only the forest's unease but her own. Through all these changes, the island itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what might come next. The trees stood taller but quieter, their branches weaving new patterns against the shifting sky. The rivers sang a different song, faster and more urgent, carrying leaves and debris like messages written in water. And in the midst of this evolving world, the Tasmanian tiger carried the weight of memory and the fragile hope of endurance. She moved with the slow grace of one who understands the fragility of balance, each step measured and careful, attuned to the smallest shift in air or scent. The forest was no longer a place of certainty, but a puzzle of shadows and whispers, where every rustle might hold promise or warning. Her eyes, sharp and steady, searched for signs, the faintest trace of a passing wallaby, the softest flutter of bird wings against the dusk. She was learning a new rhythm, one shaped by uncertainty, yet still bound to the ancient pulse beneath. At times, she would pause beneath the skeletal silhouette of a gum tree, watching the sky as clouds gathered and broke apart like restless spirits. The wind carried stories from far beyond the island, of ships on the distant sea, of voices and fires that did not belong to the forest. These whispers tangled with the scent of earth and rain, weaving a complex song that spoke of endings and beginnings entwined. The tiger listened with quiet reverence, her heart steady despite the shifting tides. Even as the seasons turned strange, the tiger's connection to the island endured. She was part of the soil and stone, the rivers and leaves, a living thread in the fabric of the land's story. Yet the changes pressed upon her world with a weight that could not be ignored, a soft urgency that rustled in the shadows, reminding her that the song she had always known was evolving into something new. And so, beneath the restless sky, the tiger moved onward, a solitary note in a forest learning a new melody, her stripes blending into the shifting light as she followed the quiet pulse of a changing world. The wind carried a new scent, one that did not belong to the forest, to the soil, or the wild creatures who had long roamed beneath the ancient canopy. It was sharper, metallic, tinged with smoke and oil, and it unsettled the quiet world that the Tasmanian tiger had always known. The footprints that followed this scent were heavier, deeper, unnatural, pressed into the soft earth where once only paws and claws had left their gentle marks. With every step, the forest's melody changed, the rhythms faltering as new sounds and shadows crept closer, threading themselves through the trees like an unfamiliar verse in an ancient song. She first noticed them near the edge of the river, where the soil was soft and the ferns leaned low. The prints were large, uneven, and carried the weight of a world unlike hers. They disrupted the mossy carpet, pressed into the mud beside the tracks of wallabies and bandicoots, and echoed a strange presence that seemed to pulse with the rising and falling breath of the island itself. She followed them cautiously, moving with the quiet grace of one who knows the forest's secrets, but now senses a deeper mystery. The new visitors, strange, upright, and loud, came with tools that bit into wood and stone, their fires burning higher and stranger than those kindled by lightning, or lightning's own children. Their voices carried in the wind, sometimes harsh, sometimes curious, but always out of place beneath the quiet dome of leaves. The tiger watched from shadows as their shapes moved, strange giants who altered the forest's song with every step. Fences appeared, slicing through groves and clearings, lines drawn where none had been before. Sheep, unfamiliar and soft-footed, grazed where wallabies once fed. The island was shifting beneath the weight of these footprints, and the tiger felt the pulse of change ripple through her bones. Her world, once a dance of light and shadow, of scent and silence, now held new challenges. The creatures she hunted became cautious, their paths rerouted by fences and fires. The forests themselves thinned, the canopy broken by axes and flame. Waterways grew muddied, carrying with them the scent of earth disturbed. The tiger learned to move more carefully, to avoid the areas where the scent of smoke lingered, where the heavy footsteps pressed deeper and deeper into the land she had always known. Yet, despite the uncertainty, she did not retreat. The forest had always been her home, and even as the edges frayed, she navigated the changing landscape with quiet resilience. She skirted clearings, slipped between fences, and slipped into shadows cast by new, unnatural lights. The island's song was no longer the same, but its heartbeat remained, steady beneath the roar of change. In the stillness of night, when the stars shimmered cold and distant, the tiger moved between worlds, between the old and the new, the wild and the tamed. She carried with her the weight of memory, the taste of fresh rain on leaves, the echo of distant waterfalls, the soft footfall of wallabies beneath moonlight. These memories were her guide, her anchor amid the shifting tides of the island's song. Sometimes she glimpsed the shapes of the newcomers, men and women with faces unreadable as stone, their eyes bright and wary. They too were travelers in this land, strangers who had come to stake their claim beneath the wide sky. The tiger watched, curious but cautious, aware that their footprints would mark the forest for generations to come. Still, beneath the moon's watchful eye, the tiger pressed forward, her stripes blending into the tapestry of shadows, a silent witness to the new verses unfolding in the island's ancient melody. The footprints not her own were many, and they pressed heavily, but she moved with the quiet strength of one who carries the past gently, who walks forward into the uncertain dawn with steady paws and patient heart. And beyond the trees, beyond the shifting earth, the island held its breath, waiting for the next note in its unfolding song. The forest's edge was no longer a quiet boundary between trees and open land. It had become a place where two worlds brushed and battled. a fragile seam stretched thin by change. Here, where once thick undergrowth had woven itself into a sanctuary of shadow and shelter, there were now wide clearings, where the sun fell harsh and unfiltered onto grasses foreign to the island's ancient soil. The air smelled different, tainted with the acrid scent of smoke, the sharp bite of wool, and the distant, restless clatter of human voices. The Tasmanian tiger moved cautiously into this new territory, her senses alert to every shift in light and sound, every change in the earth beneath her paws. Fences, like lines drawn in the sand, cut through the landscape. Pale wooden slats standing stiff and silent where vines and ferns once grew. These boundaries confined her world, shrinking the wild spaces she had known all her life. The forest no longer stretched unbroken. It was a patchwork, its seams frayed and raw. Beyond the fences grazed sheep, their pale coats a stark contrast to the deep greens and browns of the forest. The tiger watched them from the shadows, their presence strange and unsettling. They moved slowly, their grazing punctuated by sharp calls and the clang of bells, sounds that belonged to a different rhythm. She skirted the edge, careful to stay within the shelter of trees when the human figures appeared. They moved with heavy boots and tools, voices carrying commands and laughter that shattered the forest's quiet. Fires flickered at night, casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts across the clearings. The tiger's world was narrowing, and she felt the pressure in every step, every breath. The land was no longer hers alone. Still, the tiger adapted. She learned to move through the broken spaces between fences, slipping silently beneath wires and through gaps where the earth had softened. She hunted in the margins, where wallabies still fed cautiously, and birds nested in the tallest trees. Her movements were measured, every step a careful calculation of risk and reward. The forest had changed, but the pulse of life beneath it still beat, faint but steady. At night, the edge took on a different quality. The fires died down, and the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting beneath a sky thick with stars. The tiger slipped back into the shadows, her stripes blending into the darkened undergrowth as she moved through the remnants of the wilderness. She listened to the silence between sounds, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of a night bird, the faint heartbeat of the earth beneath her paws. In these moments, the edge was not a boundary, but a threshold, a place of transition where past and future met in fragile balance. Yet the pressure of the new world pressed close. The forests that had once been vast and unending now receded into memory, replaced by fields and fences and the restless presence of human hands. The tiger's path grew narrower, her choices fewer. She learned to be patient, to wait for the moments when the forest would reclaim a clearing, when the rains would wash away footprints, and when the moonlight would soften the hard edges of the land. She was a creature of shadow and silence, a ghost among the trees, moving always at the edge, neither fully of the wild nor wholly of the encroaching world. Her story was written in the spaces between, in the fading light of the forest's edge, where the song of the island grew quieter but did not yet cease. And as dawn touched the sky with pale fingers, the tiger slipped once more into the shelter of the trees, carrying the fragile hope of survival in her steady heartbeat, a silent witness to the changing world around her. The night grew deeper, thicker with silence that pressed gently against the trees and folded softly into the hollows where creatures once whispered their stories. The forest, once alive with countless calls and rustlings, now held fewer voices. The Tasmanian tiger moved through this quiet with a stillness born not just of habit, but of a deep, aching awareness. Around her, the shadows stretched long and empty, as if the life that had once filled them had quietly slipped away, leaving only the echo of memory. Once, the darkness had been a symphony, the soft rustle of leaves as wallabies padded through the undergrowth, the distant chatter of possums settling into hollow branches, the clear, sharp calls of birds weaving their songs into the night air. But now, those notes were fading, thinning to whispers and then to silence. The tiger's keen ears strained for even the faintest hint of movement, a sign that others still shared her world. Often, there was nothing but the gentle sigh of the wind weaving through the trees and the slow drip of moisture from the leaves. She walked slowly, each step measured and light, as if afraid to disturb the fragile hush. The earth beneath her paws felt heavier with loss, its breath slowing with the retreat of its many inhabitants. The scent, trails she once followed were fewer, broken, fading. The presence of others, her kin, her prey, the many lives bound to the forest's heart, grew more distant with every passing night. She remembered the warmth of her mother's pouch, the lively rush of Joey's beside her, the soft calls exchanged under the stars. Those voices, once vibrant and clear, had begun to dim long before the silence settled. Yet the tiger did not surrender to the quiet. She carried the memory of those voices deep within her, their rhythms pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the stillness. Her amber eyes searched the darkness, seeking the glimmer of movement, the faintest shimmer of life. In the spaces where light touched the earth, she paused and listened, hoping to catch the fragile thread that might connect her to the past and to those who had once walked beside her. The nights were colder now, carrying a chill that seeped into her bones, and the forest's breath felt slow and labored. She moved to a quiet clearing, where the moonlight pooled like pale water and settled beneath a sprawling tree. The bark was rough against her fur, the earth cool beneath her body. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the quiet wash over her, a gentle embrace that held both sorrow and strength. Though the voices had grown fewer, the forest still held secrets in its silence, the rustle of a distant leaf, the sudden flicker of a moth's wing, the soft murmur of water slipping over stones. These small sounds were reminders that life lingered, fragile yet unbroken. The tiger breathed in the night's cool air, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her paws and the slow turning of the seasons above. Her path was lonelier now, marked by absence as much as presence. She knew the forest's edges were closing in, and the wide wilds she had once roamed were shrinking. But she carried within her a quiet defiance, a steady heart that beat against the silence, a shadow moving beneath the fading stars. The forest was losing its voices, but she remained, a keeper of memory and witness to the last whispers of an ancient song. As dawn softened the horizon with pale light, the tiger rose and slipped back into the trees, her movements blending into the lingering shadows. The voices in the dark were fewer, but her story, woven from the threads of silence and memory, continued, a quiet echo in the fading night. Summer's breath lingered heavy on the island, thick with the scent of ripening berries and the warm hum of cicadas weaving their endless song through the treetops. The sun lay low and golden in the sky, spilling its light over the trembling leaves and shimmering pools, gilding the edges of shadowed forests. For the Tasmanian tiger, this was a time of both vitality and quiet urgency, a last dance beneath the fading heat, a chase caught between the bright pulse of life and the looming silence gathering on the horizon. She moved with a familiar grace, the muscles beneath her striped fur rippling like water as she slipped through the dappled light. The forest was alive, yet there was a stillness beneath its song, a subtle shifting that whispered of endings, her senses stretched wide, catching the fresh scent of wallabies grazing among the ferns, the rustle of small creatures scurrying through dry leaves, the faint crackle of twigs underfoot. Every movement was deliberate, every breath slow and steady, as she wove her way through the familiar paths etched deep into the earth. The chase came suddenly, like a spark striking dry grass. A wallaby broke through the undergrowth, its body taut with panic, eyes wide with the urgent desire to flee. The tiger's muscles coiled and released, a silent shadow streaking forward with fluid power. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and earth and the sharp, bright rush of adrenaline. For a moment, time slowed. Heartbeats stretched long and taut, footsteps thundered soft but sure, the world narrowing to the single, shimmering thread of the hunt. The wallaby darted left, then right, weaving between trunks and over roots, its flight a frantic dance beneath the swaying canopy. The tiger matched its speed and grace, every step a calculated effort, every breath a quiet song of pursuit. The chase was not reckless, it was a careful, honed rhythm, a conversation between predator and prey, spoken in muscle and motion. Through the fading summer light, their shapes flickered and blurred, stripes and fur melting into the forest's palette of gold and green. But this was not just any chase. It was a last blaze of power, a final assertion of life before the long quiet. The tiger's limbs burned with effort, her breath coming in slow, controlled waves, and still she pressed on, driven by instinct and the deep, unyielding rhythm of survival. In this moment, she was neither alone nor afraid. She was utterly present, a creature bound to the earth and sky, to the pulse of the island itself. The wallaby faltered near a rocky outcrop, its flight slowing as exhaustion crept in. The tiger's heart surged with the thrill of the close, but still she remained patient, her body coiled and ready. The forest held its breath, the evening light softening to a gentle glow, the cicada's song fading to a lullaby. Then, with a final, fluid leap, she closed the distance, the chase ending not with haste, but with the quiet grace of nature's balance restored. As the day faded into twilight, the tiger settled among the ferns, the warmth of the sun still lingering on her fur. Her breath slowed, matching the steady hush of the forest, as night began to weave its silver threads through the trees. Around her, the world was alive with small sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the soft murmur of water winding through the land. In this last chase of summer, the tiger carried the strength of all her days, the patience of countless hunts, the wisdom of ancient forests, the quiet power that had carried her through seasons and shadows. And though the world was shifting, and the shadows lengthening, she remained a steadfast thread in the island's unfolding story, a living echo of a wild song that would never fully fade. As darkness gathered like a soft veil and the stars began to glimmer faintly overhead, the tiger rose and slipped back into the embrace of the night, moving forward with steady paws and a heart full of quiet fire. The summer's warmth had faded, leaving behind a gentler light and cooler winds that threaded softly through the forest. The cicadas had grown silent, their endless hum replaced by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant creak of an old tree bending to the weather. The Tasmanian tiger felt the change not only in the air but deep within her bones, as though the earth itself was slowing its breath. Her world, once full of motion and quiet encounters, now moved at a slower pace. The nights stretched long and still, and the spaces between her footsteps seemed wider, heavier. She walked the old paths, the ones worn smooth by her own paws and by the many who had come before her. The scents along these trails had grown faint, washed thin by wind and time. Where once she could catch the fresh trace of kin or the strong scent of prey, now there were long stretches of nothing. Empty air, clean and unmarked. She paused often, nose lifted, ears turning toward every whisper of sound. But more often than not, the forest answered her with silence. The rains came irregularly, as if the clouds had forgotten their ancient patterns. When they fell, the drops were cool and gentle, bringing a brief freshness to the moss and ferns. Yet even in those moments the forest felt different, quieter. The waterways ran slower, their songs subdued, and the once rich chorus of creatures at dusk had thinned to a few scattered voices. The tiger had always been a solitary creature, but now the solitude felt larger, stretching out like the horizon, pressing against her from every side. Her movements became slower, more deliberate. She hunted when she must, conserving her energy for the moments that truly called for it. Prey was harder to find, and those that remained were watchful and quick to flee. The wallabies were fewer now, and their trails more winding, leading her through unfamiliar parts of the forest. She followed them quietly, but she felt the effort in her limbs more than she once had. Her body, lean and strong from years of movement, now carried a deeper fatigue, one not just from age, but from the weight of change. The nights, though long, were beautiful in their own way. The moon hung pale and steady over the forest, casting silver light that caught in the tiger's amber eyes. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of eucalyptus and the faint salt of the distant sea. She would sometimes stop in the open, letting the moonlight wash over her, feeling the quiet as something that could be touched, soft, cool, and endless. In those moments, the island seemed to lean closer, as if listening to her breathing, as if keeping her company in the absence of others. But the quiet was not only in the forest, it was in her heart as well. The memories of past seasons, of playful chases in her youth, of meeting others in the moonlit clearings, of hearing the many voices of the night, rose more often now, filling the spaces left by what had been lost. She carried them gently, like fragile leaves gathered before the wind could take them. These memories were a comfort, yet also a reminder that the forest's song was fading, its verses growing shorter with each passing year. She found herself resting more often, curling into the shelter of tree roots or hollow logs, her ears still alert, but her body grateful for the pause. The rhythm of her days had shifted. There was no longer the constant need to move, to explore, to seek out the next hunt. Instead, there was a quieter rhythm, one of listening, of watching, of simply being. The forest still gave her enough, but it no longer overflowed as it once had. And so, the days slipped gently into nights, and the nights into days, each one carrying her farther along the slow, inevitable path of the long quiet. The island still held her, still wrapped her in its mists and its moonlight, but the threads that tied her to the chorus of life were fewer now, finer. She walked on, steady and unhurried, her paws falling into the earth's soft embrace, her eyes reflecting both the fading world around her and the strength still flickering within. In the stillness, she did not yet stop. She continued, carrying the forest's memory in every step, knowing that even in the quiet, her presence was a part of the island's story, a living breath in the long pause before the next chapter would unfold. The forest had grown quiet enough that her own breathing was the loudest sound she carried with her. It was not the silence of danger, sharp and tense, but the slow, deep hush of something drawing toward its end. The Tasmanian tiger moved through it with unhurried steps, her body lean and weathered, her strength still there, but folded into something softer now, like the coals of a long-burning fire. Each step seemed to sink deeper into the soil, as if the earth itself was ready to hold her more closely. The nights came cooler now, the stars sharper in the sky, their light falling across her striped back in pale silver bars. She moved less often under the moon, content to watch it rise from the shelter of a hollow, her head resting on her forepaws. Sometimes she dreamed before she fully closed her eyes, dreams of warm summer hunts, of her mother's steady heartbeat in the safe darkness of the pouch, of other tigers she had once passed in moonlit clearings. These dreams did not make her ache. They felt like warm blankets laid over her, each one holding a piece of the life she had lived. She began to choose smaller paths, ones that led to the familiar, places she had always known. A sunlit rock beside the creek where dragonflies danced, a hollow log that smelled faintly of moss and shelter, the curve of the hill that caught the morning light just as it broke over the trees. She lingered in these places longer than she used to, as if memorizing them, though perhaps it was the other way around. Perhaps they were memorizing her. Food was still found, but she no longer chased with the same fierce urgency. When she hunted, it was with the quiet skill of long practice, but without the endless hunger of youth. A single meal could last her for days, and between them she rested, listening to the way the forest's breath moved around her. The rains still came, sometimes sudden and drumming, sometimes soft as whispers, and she let them wash over her, her fur growing heavy and warm against her skin. The forest's changes, which had once stirred wariness in her, now seemed distant, like a storm on the far horizon. The fences, the strange scents, the heavy-footed shapes, these things still existed, but they no longer drew her from her chosen places. She was part of the deeper rhythm now, the slow tide pulling her toward stillness. The island had always known how to cradle its creatures when the time came, and she felt that cradle beneath her even as she walked. One evening, when the air was warm with the last breath of day and the sky glowed with the soft colors of dusk, she found herself drawn to a hollow beneath an old myrtle tree. The roots curled over it like protective arms, and the ground inside was dry, lined with fallen leaves that smelled of rain and sun. She stepped inside, turned a slow circle, and lowered herself to the earth. The hollow fit her perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along. She lay with her head resting against the curve of root, her ears still turning toward the faint sounds outside. A bird's last call, the rustle of leaves settling in the breeze, the distant hush of the sea. Her eyes grew heavy, the world beyond the hollow blurring into shapes and shadows. She was not afraid. There was no danger here, only the gentle drawing down of the day, and of something larger than the day. Sleep came in waves, rising and falling like the tide. In one moment, she was curled in the hollow. In the next, she was running again through the summer grass, the wind in her fur, the scent of rain ahead of her. She felt the forest's song in her bones, each note familiar and steady, the kind of song that never truly ends. Somewhere far off, she thought she heard other paws moving with hers, the rhythm of kin returning to walk beside her. The night deepened, and the moon rose over the myrtle's crown, spilling light down through the branches. It caught her stripes in silver, turned her still form into a shadow painted with starlight. The island, in its vast patience, seemed to lean closer, as though it, too, was keeping watch. And there, in the hollow's safe embrace, the Tasmanian tiger slept, slipping gently from the world of leaf and stream into the place where memory holds every step, every breath, every heartbeat she had ever given to the island. She did not wake, but her presence did not vanish. It was simply folded into the great quiet, into the soil, the water, the wind. Outside, the forest exhaled, The leaves rustled softly, the creek kept flowing, and the stars burned on, keeping the shape of her story in their light. Morning came softly, as it always had, the first light brushing the hills in gold before it slipped down into the valleys. Mist rose from the rivers, curling through the trees like the breath of something ancient and patient. In the place beneath the old myrtle tree, where the earth was lined with leaves and guarded by roots, there was no movement now, only the faint scent of fur, the imprint of a body that had rested there through the long night. The Tasmanian tiger was gone from the waking world, yet the forest did not feel emptier. It felt full, as though it carried her still, woven into every thread of its fabric. The island had always been a keeper of stories. It told them in the slow wearing of stone by rain, in the way the wind carried the scent of sea salt miles inland, in the layered songs of birds at dawn. Now it held her story too, not in words, but in the quiet persistence of memory. The shape of her paws remained pressed into soft riverbanks until the current smoothed them away. Her scent lingered in the hollows and along the trails she had walked so many times, clinging to the moss and bark. The rustle of ferns in the evening breeze seemed to echo her passing, as though the leaves themselves whispered of her. The other creatures knew in their own way. The wallabies that had once darted at the sound of her step now moved through the forest without that shadow of fear, though they paused sometimes at the places where her scent lingered, as if listening for her. Birds still called in the high branches at dawn, their notes carrying the same clear sweetness, yet threaded now with something softer, a space in the song where another voice had once belonged. Even the rivers, restless and eternal, seemed to flow with a gentler sound, as though they too remembered the striped hunter who had come to drink at their edges under moonlight. Seasons turned, as they always would. Spring returned, bringing the bright green unfurling of ferns and the scent of new blossoms drifting through the air. Summer followed, warm and heavy with the hum of insects, the forests alive with light. Autumn came cloaked in amber and russet, the leaves falling like slow rain to carpet the ground. Winter wrapped the island in mist, drawing the world close and quiet. Through each turn her absence remained, but so did the sense of her presence. Subtle, steady, enduring. Sometimes, in the deep hush between night and dawn, the wind would carry something that made the heart quicken. A fleeting sound, like the faint tread of paws on leaf litter, or the rustle of grass as if brushed by a moving shadow. There were those who would swear they saw her then, a striped figure slipping between the trees, just beyond the reach of the light. She would vanish as quickly as she appeared, leaving only the memory of amber eyes glinting in the dark. The island did not confirm these sightings, nor deny them. It simply kept its secrets, as it always had. The story of the Tasmanian tiger did not end with her last breath. It lived on in the land she had walked, in the rivers she had drunk from, in the quiet places where she had lain in the shade. It lived in the patterns of the wind through the grass, in the curve of the hills under the evening sun, in the way the forest seemed to pause at times, as though waiting for her return. Memory, on this island, was not something locked away. It was something that breathed, that moved, that folded itself into every living thing. And so, the island remembered. It remembered the first small steps taken in a pouch's safe darkness. It remembered the first light of dawn touching young eyes, the first hunt, the quiet nights beneath a sky crowded with stars. It remembered the patient strength of her stride, the way she knew the paths by heart, the way she listened to the song of the forest as if it were her own heartbeat. It remembered her through the turning of countless seasons, through the shifting balance of shadow and light. For the world beyond the island, she became a name spoken in wonder and regret, a creature from another time. But here, in the quiet green heart of Tasmania, she was not gone. She was the hush before the rain begins to fall, the ripple of shadow at the forest's edge, the glint of light on still water at dusk. She was the warm breath of summer wind and the slow drift of winter mist. She was part of the island's song, one note among many, but one that would never truly fade. And when the moon rose over the dark ridges and poured silver into the valleys, the island would hum softly to itself. A lullaby woven from earth and sky and the memory of stripes moving through shadow. Somewhere in that song she walked still, not as flesh and bone, but as something quieter and deeper, as everlasting as the stars overhead. The forest would grow and change, as it always had. New lives would stir in the undergrowth. New voices would join the chorus of the night. But in the spaces between those voices, in the still moments when the wind paused in the trees, there would always be the echo of her, moving without sound, watching with eyes of gold, as much a part of the island as the stones, the rivers, and the endless sky. The Tasmanian Tiger's story was not one of loss alone. It was a story of belonging, of the deep bond between creature and place, of a life lived in quiet harmony with the turning world. And though her paws would no longer press the earth, the memory of them would remain, soft, steady, eternal, woven into the heart of Tasmania, where the island remembers always.